This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Several weeks ago on social media, I asked for questions from listeners for my interview with Jeff Smith, creator of Bone, RASL, and his latest comic Tukey, which is currently being reworked. Thanks for your questions. We got to most of them, and finally this week you can hear his answers. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. Jeff and I tried to talk via Skype, but we had some technical issues. I couldn't hear him, which would make interviewing him a bit difficult. So we had to settle for talking by phone. I'm talking with Jeff Smith. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Okay, and you're in Columbus?
I am in Key West, Florida.
Key West, Florida. Okay. Are you still living in Columbus?
And yeah. I still live in Columbus. I live in a German village. But I come down and spend the winter in Key West because it's very nice.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, better weather than Columbus.
Yeah, it's most of the time, yeah.
But now
I still love Columbus in the summer, though.
You grew up there, right?
Yeah. I grew up in Columbus, yeah. I grew up there. Travel a lot. Vijay and I moved to Northern California for a few years when I was first starting the comic, Bone. But we found ourselves missing Columbus, so we ended up back there.
I see. And now the Billy Ireland Museum is there, and you're involved with that in some way, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I'm on the advisory board, and I've known Lucy Caswell, who was the original founding curator of the museum, for 35 years or something, for a very long time. And she had just kind of started putting the museum together, the library together. And so I've known her for a long time, and I've watched the library grow. It's moved to different places on the OSU campus, and it's currently in a magnificent, 120-year-old building right in the corner of campus. It's beautiful. Beautiful place.
Yeah, I've seen the photos of it. And I saw a video or two also. Yeah, so now when you were growing up in Columbus, what comics were you reading?
Well, in the newspaper, Peanuts was really big. This was like when Snoopy really kind of broke out and, started being a World War I flying ace in the mid-'60s. I loved Pogo because I never saw anything drawn quite so beautifully. I've been trying my whole life to copy Will Kelly's drawings. And because I fail, I've got my own style. I think how you get your own style, because you're not as good as what you're trying to do.
I see. Now, were you making any comics when you were a kid?
Well, sure. I mean, I little notepads and things. I used to draw little stories, and mostly about the characters, being chased by monsters and flying off cliffs, and the same things I still write comics about.
Were these original characters, or were you riffing on stuff you saw on TV or in the paper? Or
it was. I think I was probably trying to make comics like the ones I was reading, like in Uncle Scrooge stories were a real big favorite of mine. which is why I think Phony Bone is pretty much an Uncle Scrooge type character. He's the richest bone in Boneville. I was drawing the 3 Bone cousins as early as like age 9, I think, and they had very similar personalities. They haven't changed much. So it was just pretty inconsequential stories that aren't very good or anything, but it was fun to do. It was fun to try to figure out how, the panels work, and from one to the next.
Well, I saw that the Bone characters were based originally on a telephone receiver. Is that right?
Well, the very first drawing of Phone Bone that I did, and for some reason I liked that character the second I drew him, but his mouth was wide open, and it was like in profile, and he sort of looked like an old-fashioned telephone receiver. And it's old-fashioned, even though, that's what everybody had until about, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he kind of looked a little bit like a telephone. So he became Phone Bone. I also was a big fan of Don Martin and his crazy cartoons in Mad Magazine. And he had a generic name, which was Mr. Phone Bone or Mrs. Phone Bone or Phone Bone's Beer or Phone Bone's Jewelers. And I just, as a kid, I just loved that sound, that Phone Bone, which just worked for me.
I see. Well, I noticed that
so between the two things, yeah.
I noticed.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to reread all of Bone before this. I got about halfway done, but I noticed in volume 2, there's when they're betting on the cow race, and Lucius bets on Grandma, and Phony Bone's mouth drops open, and he looks like a telephone receiver. It seemed to be that same original sketch.
Well, in a lot of ways, it was that first drawing was of Phone Bone. He was very angry. He was just yelling. I don't remember at all what I was thinking at the time. But Phone Bone, started to smile more as a character and became a much more everyman type of personality. But the angry one did resurface. So you're not wrong. He came back as his cousin Phony Bone.
Okay. So I read about you on Wikipedia here, so I'm taking some stuff from that. I mean, of course, Wikipedia is never wrong, as we know.
No, it's online. It's true.
But it said that you had wanted Bone to be kind of the epic-length Uncle Scrooge saga that Karl Barks never did. So was that kind of how Bone started, or when you started doing it seriously anyway?
Yeah. I mean, at some point, I do remember, kind of uncovering the links between different Uncle Scrooge stories that Karl Barks had done. And, he was creating a backstory for Uncle Scrooge, how he got his fortune. He was a miner in Alaska digging for gold. And he kind of got pieces of his backstory slowly coming together. And I fantasized that if you could just line up all the Uncle Scrooge comic books from one end to the other, you would get like this intricate, story that would form like an epic novel. And of course, that wasn't really what it was. It's just a very well done, thoughtful comic. But that did give me the idea, wouldn't it be fun to actually do that, to have an epic length novel with comic book characters? Mm-hmm. At the time, I wasn't aware of anybody that had done that. I since then I've seen some Japanese manga that is like that, like Nausicaa by Miyazaki. But at the time, it was actually a very weird idea to try to tell a giant novel in comic book form. Mm-hmm. In fact, I remember trying to hide the fact that it was going to be a single novel for a number of years because I was afraid if somebody found out I was doing a giant fantasy story, they would make fun of me and stop buying the comics. So.
So yeah, you started out doing animation, right? And then you switched to doing comics. So why did you decide to change?
Well, I was always interested in doing comics, but comic strips was my main focus. And I sent some samples of Bone comic strips into various newspaper syndicates like King Features or Tribune Media and all those places, but no one was really interested in the strip. The main complaint really was that they just weren't that funny. but the problem I think a lot of editors had was that I was mixing, the cartoon characters with the realistic humans, realistic and all. It's kind of relative, but you know what I mean. With all the monsters and dragons, they were just like, what? They didn't know how to market that.
They wanted something more down to earth, huh?
Yeah. So at some point, I kind of gave up on the idea of doing a comic strip. I just felt like it was hopeless. And so that's when I started up an animation company, Liz and Friends. I wasn't that interested in animation. I was just a little interested in it. And while I was doing the animation, I discovered comic books in the comic book store. And once I saw, the underground and the indie stuff that was being done, and things like Dave Sims' Cerebus that was self-published, I thought, this is interesting. This is, this looks like something you could actually do your comic. And so the animation was really just something to keep me busy until I figured out how to break into comics. Yeah.
So at what point did you figure out how to break into comics? I mean, the whole self-publishing is not the easiest thing.
No, I was young and deluded. It was less important to me to have it be, successful than it was to just get it started. Because I've been really itching to do it for like 7 or 8 years. And I just wanted to get it going. And, I did a little research. I bought a bunch of comics. I looked at them, just figured out, okay, so here's how a comic works. And they were black and white, so that was simple. Didn't have to worry about having to figure out how to pay for color or whatever. Figured out the distribution system, how you submit it. And in some ways that was not that hard because there weren't that many people doing it, so there weren't people like trying to stop me. Do you know what I mean? Nobody was trying to control who was doing a little self-published comics or not. And I did feel like later that when there was so many people doing it, that retailers and the distributors all got a little, more cautious about it. So I was able to just do it. Whether or not anybody would like it or not, there's nothing I could do about that. I could just do my comic and hope for the best. I think Vijaya said to me, look, you can do this, but have a plan B. Do it for 1 year, and I got 6 issues out. There's no interest in it and no traction at all, then just go back to animation. And I agreed with that. I thought that was fair enough. Fortunately for me, on the 6th issue, we started getting good reviews and seeing the numbers start to go up just a little bit, and that was just what I needed to have hope and hold on.
So then you had to kind of figure out, like, marketing it, right? I mean, now at that point, I guess the distribution was not all Diamond yet, was it? At that point in the
no,
90s?
I can't remember how many. I can't remember how many distributors there were. There was something like 12 or 15 or something. There was quite a few. So if one company wouldn't pick you up, you still have another 10 that would pick it up. I mean, there was Comics Hawaii, who was a distributor in Hawaii. They ordered, they might order like 50 copies or something. But Diamond and Capital Diamond was still always the biggest. Capital was a close second, and they would order tens of thousands each. So, yeah, I did have to figure it out, and I got lucky because a local comic book store owner, I think I had 3 issues out, but he really liked the comic. Was really supportive, and one day he said, "Let's come with me to this." It wasn't a comic book convention. I'm trying to think of what it was, the name of it. It was a gathering of comic book store owners going to like what it looked like a convention. My brain is just not telling me what's an expo. What do you do when you go to like it's a business thing for people that just make toilets? It's like
a trade show.
Thank you. I could not get that word. It was a trade show, and it was put on by Capital Comics. I don't know. I hope I'm not having a stroke. I can't remember anything. Anyway,
right here on my podcast. A stroke.
Yeah, right.
On my podcast. Yeah. Anyway.
So we drive to this trade show, and all the publishers have little booths set up. And I was a publisher, so I brought. I registered and was able to sit at a table, and I had a little easel, and I just like clamped a bunch of my artwork to the easel, and and I was right next to, I don't remember, Harris Comics or whoever did Vampirilla. I remember there was a Vampirilla model. She was very popular. All the comic retailers trying to get their picture taken with her, which brought them close to my table. And 2 good things came out of that. One, most of the other publishers, they didn't bring their artists to the show. This is just a sales thing, so they have like their sales department people are there. But I was the actual artist, so I could like draw pictures for people and talk to them, and that actually I learned at that show that if I could get people to stand there while I drew a picture, more people would come over, and pretty soon you got a little crowd, and the crowd would feel like, what's going on over there? So that was one good lucky thing I figured out. And the other was, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any other cartoonists or anything. I didn't know anybody in comic books. So I would just go hang out at the lounge, with, it ended up being like all these important comic book shop owners. Guys like Warren Ruth or Jim Hanley, a bunch of guys on the West Coast, again, maybe I need to have some more coffee. My mind is just blanking on me. Joe Field is who I was trying to think of, and Joe Ferrara. Anyway. So here was the trick. In the world of the direct market comic book shops, the customer for me is not the person who buys the comic and takes it home and reads it. It's the store owner, because the direct market is non-returnable. You probably know this.
Yeah.
The store owner buys the comics, and he's the one you've got to talk into, because why would he, he's got to believe you and like you in order to risk spending any money on you. So that was a breakthrough for me, that I realized I needed to spend time with these guys, and I liked them, and they liked me, and we sat around and drank beer, and pretty soon, they're like, "Hey, come on over here." They, call Chuck Rosansky over. "Come on over here. You gotta look at this. Look at this kid stuff." So it was fun, and so then I realized what marketing really meant is I just needed to be on the road and be where the retailers are.
I see. Sure. And then what about the printing aspect of things? Was that challenging in some way?
And I look back at it, and I can't believe that I did most of Bone without Photoshop. Photoshop. That part was challenging because you had to do overlays and things like that. But because I had worked in animation and I'd worked in commercial illustration and advertising, I knew how to do that kind of stuff. Right? I did understand reproduction and printing and all that kind of stuff. So that wasn't too challenging. I also had owned the animation studio for 7 or 8 years with a couple of partners. So the idea of having a company and books and trying to keep your head above water, I understood all that. I wasn't too intimidated by that part. The hardest thing just came with, ironically, when the book started to get popular and sales started to go up. When I was just by myself, it became a nightmare to keep up and get comics done because I was spending all my time, faxing reorders to the printer or invoicing comic book stores and packing up orders for comic book stores and putting them in boxes and then loading them on the UPS truck when it came. And it seems like I was always doing that and not drawing comics. So pretty soon I was like, I needed help. So I went to a comic book store in town and said, is there a kid, or one of your customers that would be, I say a kid, he wasn't a kid. But he was young to me. And I found an assistant who came and worked with me in my house for like 3 or 4 hours a day, and he did all the shipping, and I could actually start getting some comic pages knocked out. Seems to me like that was around the time I was doing that cow race story too.
Mm-hmm. So I had a few questions about Bone. So where did you ever get the idea to have Grandma Ben race cows? It just, looking back, it seems like kind of a random idea, but
yeah, it is random. I did actually. I was visiting someone's grandmother's farm, and she raised bulls, and she saw that some of the cows had gotten into the wrong, part of the farm, way far away, like a quarter of a mile away. She could see them way up in the wrong place. This little old lady, just hopped over the fence and just took off running at these bulls. And I just thought that was the funniest thing I ever saw. And it was supposed to just be a random weird joke that she raises cows. But I started getting letters from people. This is back when people actually wrote letters and their favorite comics. And they would say, I can't wait to see Grandma Ben raise cows. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to actually figure this out now. I remember putting it off for like 3 or 4 issues, just going, I'm not going to do this. I can figure it out later. And I kept building up, the anticipation of the cow race. I still didn't know what it was. Even I got to the issue, and I'm like, I do not know what's going to happen. And then it just came out, and I was just grateful that I got away with it.
Well, in reading that issue again, I think it cracked me up at least as much as it did the first time. When the cows crash into the rat creatures, and it's just chaos.
Yeah. Good, I'm glad. Yeah, there was a couple things in there like that. But I was like, I'm just gonna embrace how ridiculous this is and go for it. Like, and someone was being chased by 2 rat creatures. They get stuck in between 2 trees like Laurel and Hardy in a doorway.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. but I was starting to laugh at it while I was writing it. So I said, well, I can't make it any better. So here we go.
This is not exactly a question, but reading this again, it struck me. Well, I mean, this is hardly the first time that such a situation has happened, but reading Phony Bone stirring up fears of the dragons among the townspeople, and the townspeople kind of buying into it. It felt like reading a take on the Trump campaign.
Is that not bizarre? I know that he's I mean, just even page 2 of the comic, he's like, you can't do anything to a rich person that he doesn't want. But I really feel like those forces have been around for a very long time.
Right.
I originally wrote those stories in the 80s when I did a version of them in my college newspaper. I had a slightly different version, but it was still the same idea of phony, trying to manipulate people for his own power and stroking up fear. Because that's just always been. That's just always a thing, It's never going to go out of style.
Been all through human history.
It's just particularly. Yes, exactly. So I was just, I'm uncomfortable by those forces, and apparently it didn't make any difference that I wrote a story about it because we got Trump elected anyway.
Yeah.
I was trying to warn people.
Yeah, back when he was just this real estate developer.
Yeah, well, I wasn't talking about Trump. I hardly know who Trump was back then.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's been like 25 years ago or more now that you started the publishing Bone.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So in fact, I think last year was the 25th anniversary.
Right. Yeah.
That blows my mind. I'll tell you that.
Imagine. Yeah. And of course, it was published in black and white originally, and then when it came out from Scholastic, it was in color. And now I haven't seen the color version, but I was wondering, so when doing it black and white, of course, there are a lot of like heavy black areas. And did you convert some of those in the color version? I mean, like there's a place where someone's bleeding and the blood is black, but did you make it red in the color?
I think in that most of the time my rule was the line work is don't change it, just color behind it. I think I know the scene you're talking about where King Doc is attacking them and Foma and wakes up and he's got blood on his head.
Right.
That one particular case, we squirted a little red tint over the black line art for that. Because it was I thought a little more powerful if it was actually red.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
but generally speaking, no, we didn't. No. We did not change the artwork to color it.
Okay. Has there been any difference between the audience you had in mind when making Bone versus the audience that it actually reached? I mean, who were you thinking of? Who were you thinking of when you made it?
I was very well aware of that. There were no kids reading comics in the 80s and 90s. But I wasn't particularly interested in making comics for kids. What I wanted to do was make a comic for adults that looked like a kid's comic. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to make something like a Carl Barks or a Walt Kelly comic, but for adults, so that it had all the elements of a Donald Duck story, but was really for grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the way, it became it actually became a children's book instead of just supposed to be looking like one. And that was one of those things that you could never plan for or try to make happen. It was part of the changing comic book business, the landscape. There just were more people like Neil Gaiman and there were people like that were doing different kinds of comics. Oh, and you had all the Fantagraphics people like the Hernandez brothers and Chris Ware and Dan Klaus that were, pulling in readers beyond the core, Marvel and DC collectors, which made up the bulk of comic book readers, right? Yeah, but all of a sudden you'd start going to comic book convention and you'd see women.
Mm-hmm.
Or I remember being blown away when I saw a show and two women that were just like girlfriends in high school came to a comic book show. Now that would be nothing today.
Yeah.
But that was actually a landmark, It's like I can't believe this day. I will never forget this. Something is changing. So somehow kids started reading my comic, and then Scholastic actually called my wife and asked if they could launch a graphic novel imprint with Bone. And the J heard them out, and she said, "We need to talk to these guys. They are serious." So that turned out to be a very unexpected but wonderful detour on the way to finishing the book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a question that I'd always kind of wondered about after I finished reading the series. But in the early volumes, when the hooded one is mentioned, the pronoun is always he. And then it turns out that the hooded one is female. So did you change your mind at some point about who the hooded one was, or were the characters themselves supposed to be confused about the gender of the hooded one?
It's the second one. I had the hooded one had been a character in my college newspaper version of Bone, and was Grandma Ben's sister in that as well. So I went into the comic book and was trying to suggest that the characters didn't know. They assumed it was a kid.
Okay.
So I was definitely trying to fool or distract the readers.
Okay, and since it's a comic book, we can't tell what the hooded one's voice sounds like. So
exactly. But I try to convey that it's a whispery, raspy thing that maybe you wouldn't be able to tell.
Right. Yeah. Well, the way that the stem of the word balloon goes right up into the hood, it always creeped me out.
It is creepy. I don't know why I did that. I thought it was creepy too. So.
Well, and especially that scene where Phony Bone is washing dishes and the hooded one is approaching the window. That scene really freaked me out. I'm reading it today; it still freaks me out.
Good. That's excellent. Yeah, that was. I really enjoyed drawing silent panels and stretching things out. And that particular scene was I felt like everything was working. It felt like it was the timing, the amount of time it took to read it felt really real, like it was really working. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I explained that very well.
Yeah, well, it's a whole page of exactly the same shot, and we out of Phony Bone and out the window at the hooded one, and she's just getting closer and closer. Coming up, your questions. Why did the comedy in Bone let up? Why is Tukey being reworked? How long did it take him to master the brush? Plus, reader reaction to his change of pace with RASL, why he doesn't use motion lines, and more. But first, help Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles move up to bigger and better things. Pledge a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. I'm trying to find a way to make podcasting into a career. Your pledges at Patreon can help make it happen, which would free me up to make that much more content. Help us out at patreon.com/deconcomics.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Polls! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. A terrific podcast, Rave's Got a Rugrat, that brings review, film analysis, and sociological impact to episode-by-episode musings without ever losing the feeling of two brothers with towels tied around their necks, running through the backyard. Unmissable.
Exquisite.
You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com.
Wild!
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
I got some questions from listeners through Twitter and Facebook, and some of them are about Bone, so I'll put those in here. Although this first one from Coom, I actually don't agree with the premise of the question, but I'll read it anyway.
All right.
So his question was, why did the wonderfully buoyant sense of humor ebb and thin out after the third volume of Bone? And I say I don't agree with it because I got partway into reading volume 6 here, and volume 5 I thought still had a lot of funny points. So I'm not sure that the humor kind of disappears as quickly as he's saying, if it disappears at all. I mean, it does get kind of more serious in a way, but...
Yeah, it was. I thought it. Well, I've heard this before, and it's generally from people who were buying the comic book as it was coming out. So, it would come out about 5 or 6 times a year, and the first part of the story, it was important, I felt, to make people really enjoy it and like it and laugh and have a good time, because I knew that eventually I was going to bring the story down. I mean, that's always, a big fantasy epic works. You got to hit a really dark point at some point. Mm-hmm. Well, in order to really care, I felt like there had to be something wonderful at the beginning. I mean, that might be too strong of a word, but I wanted to introduce everybody in the town. I wanted it to be funny, so that when it wasn't, you would really notice it. I don't really hear that too much from people that read it now, that it's complete, because you just kind of go through the story, and I think the humor stays. It's just that there's bad things going on, so it's not quite as it's not only humor. You know what I mean? But but people who were reading it as it came out were really shocked. I think when the story took the fairy tale turn, and I mean, and this woman who's living with her grandmother out in the woods turns out to be, the Sleeping Beauty or the princess or whatever. I thought it was. I had fun doing it. It was exactly what I wanted to do. So I had a good time.
Okay. And Emmett, a similar question, but not exactly the same. Well, he says, I'm curious about the book embracing epic fantasy after a gentle opening arc, a lot like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. The bones equals hobbits. Lord of the Rings opens with Bilbo's birthday, Fatty Bulger, Farmer Maggot, and then we have Nasal Barrow White's Evil Blades. Bone also escalates from light comedy and pratfalls to dark magic and all-out war. Quite a transition in pacing. Was Lord of the Rings in your mind at all when you wrote the story?
Oh yeah, very much. It was one of my main influences the whole time. I think Bone practically bleeds the Lord of the Rings. But I also was very interested in, like I said, Uncle Scrooge adventures, that kind of story, that kind of humor, that kind of pacing. Moby Dick was a big influence on the shape and style of the book. I wanted there to be metaphors and layers to the story, that you could read the book over and over again and find things. And so I wanted it to be like that. Also, I was really into the Odyssey, which was also, this giant epic quest story.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, all of those things are in Bone and shaped it.
A couple of people were asking about the Bone movie. Tom Connors and Jacob Cleary both asked about it. I hadn't even been aware of it, but I looked it up. I guess it was just announced a few months ago, huh?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are people that are interested in doing the Bone movie, and I wish them luck. I've been working with Hollywood for 20 years, and for some reason, it's a very difficult thing to adapt. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but I don't get too worked up over it. Keep your fingers crossed.
Okay.
Maybe it'll happen.
So may or may not. Okay.
I'll believe it when I go to the theater and see it.
Coombe was also asking if you think you'll ever attempt something as ambitious and long in scope as Bone again.
Maybe. I started an online comic a couple of years ago called Tukey. It takes place at the dawn of human history. And I got about 100 pages into it, and I found I didn't enjoy the online aspect of it. But I've been noodling around with it, and I think that has potential to be a longer work. So I'm actually toying with the idea of doing something on that scale again. I can't believe it. And if I can think of a way to make the story shorter, I will do so. But we'll see.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about Tukey, because I checked your website and I saw it had been there and then it was taken down to be reworked. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but...
Exactly what it sounds like. I was putting it up online and I had this idea of, okay, if you're going to put up 1 page or 2 pages at a time, I thought it would be cool to do it in the style of like a Sunday comic page, like Prince Valiant or Flash Gordon or something like that. And it was really fun to do that way. But then later I tried publishing it as a comic book, and it didn't. It was fun to do, but it didn't work for the comic because it had a start and stop quality to it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing. I'm actually I still have those 100 pages. I want to use as much of them as I can, but I'm adding pages in between, and I'm stretching things out, and I am reworking it. I
see. To make it kind of a little more like a smoother narrative, not so much like Sunday comics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that. So, and so that's it. When it reemerges, I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take, but it'll be probably in book form next time it shows up.
Okay. Patrick is asking how long it took you to master the brush.
Yeah, 1 issue. I drew bill number 1 with a pen nib, with a dip pen, and I'd used that my whole life. And a buddy of mine, who was my animation partner, Jim Kemmerer, he says, "Why don't you try using a brush? Because it would go a lot faster." Well, that's what I wanted to hear. So he gave me one of his brushes, and I used it. And I can't understand it, but I started with the 2nd issue. By the end of the 2nd issue, the brush just worked. I have no idea why, because I've tried it before, and it was very difficult. But it was just the right tool at the right time. I mean.
I see. So it just kind of clicked.
It just clicked. I had been told that it would be faster, so I was like, "Yeah, it's go fast," and somehow it just all really worked. So I was pleased with that.
Okay. So I have some questions about RASL, and first I'll take Coombe's question. He's asking if you were happy with RASL and the response to it.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely was. I mean, I did think some people were a little put off by the fact that I wasn't doing Bone anymore. But that is a very real criticism. So but other than that, I think it went pretty well. The sales were good. It won Best Graphic Novel when it was done at the Eisners. So I'm pretty pleased with it.
Well, yeah, I did want to ask about that because, anybody in any art form who does a certain thing for a long time and then does something different, like the difference between Bone and RASL, going against expectations can cause some kind of, complaining among some members of the audience. What kind of problems did you, or problems, I don't know if that's the right word, but response in that vein did you get?
Well, if you go on Amazon and look at the reviews, they're either 5-star or they're like 2 stars. Very few in between. Some people just were like, the problem with this book is it doesn't have any bones in it. Like I said, that kind of thing, or meh, I didn't get it. I'm disappointed. People are allowed to not like something. That's fine with me. Enough people liked it that I was able to finish it. I got to explore this strange world of physics and Tesla and conspiracy theories and film noir. I had a good time. It was a good book that I enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting too. I just had to set Bone aside and think about it as something completely separate. We talked about it. Go ahead.
Well, I think it still looks like I drew it. I think it doesn't. It's still use the same paintbrush and. Although the color, did you see the color version?
No, I didn't.
One thing I do with my books when I collect them is I do kind of what I was describing with Tukey, where if a scene feels a little rough, I will go back in and make it better. I used to get a lot of shit for that too, because somehow that people thought that was cheating. like if you're going to collect it in a book, if I change it, it's almost as if I was trying to trick people into having to buy it because it had new stuff in it. But I didn't look at it that way at all. And so I did that all the time with Bone. If you only read it in the comic books, it's a completely different story by the time I finished it, 12, 15 years later. And then same with RASL. I did the same thing. I fixed things. I corrected drawings that I didn't like. I filled it out. I made the ending a little longer. And the color, oh my goodness, Steve Hammaker colored this thing, and it's the best color I've ever seen in an American comic book. It looks like a European album. Just gorgeous. So I guess I'm saying you should look at that. I don't know do you have a good comic book store there?
I'd probably have to mail order it, because if I was lucky enough to find it here, it would probably be extraordinarily expensive because it'd be imported. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've been there, and they're mostly just manga shops.
Right. Yeah. You just have to find. There are a few places that are imported book stores that might have it, or would have some American comics. But yeah, so we talked about RASL in episode 363, and I could have sworn that I got a blog comment or email from you about it, but I looked back and I couldn't find it anywhere. Am I misremembering? Am I getting you mixed up with somebody else?
No, I think I remember that as well, but I wouldn't know how to find it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
where
I thought. I can't remember, but I kind of remember that. Yeah, that I liked that podcast, or somebody asked a question and maybe I answered you on Twitter. I can't.
Yeah,
it was something like that. I don't remember.
I was thinking it was a comment on the blog, but it's not there for some reason. But yeah, it does seem like you answered something. I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have gone. Maybe I don't think I would have gone on your blog page and respond. Maybe I don't remember. But I did do something. I did communicate. I listened to the show and I did write something. So you're not wrong. I remember that.
Okay. I don't know what happened to it now, but a few other
Can't
questions.
Can't prove it.
In RASL, there's a character called the President of the Street, and what we were trying to figure out in the podcast 4 years ago. What's that character's function? We weren't quite sure what he was doing there.
His function was to be an intermediary between the cosmic unknown, which is represented by the parallel universes, and RASL. So he was a character that recognized RASL even when he was on different parallel worlds, and he was kind of a mental patient, I guess. But because of that, he could hear voices, and the voices he heard were actually real voices in parallel universes. That was the idea.
Okay.
So when the little girl, who is a manifestation of the multiverse itself, attempts to get through, she was not able to actually communicate very well with RASL, but she was able to talk to this guy. That was it. Okay. And also, he was just a weird character, just to be interesting.
Was he based on Tom Waits at all?
Yeah. I don't think I did it on purpose, but it sure looks like him, doesn't it? I was doing a book tour in India while I was working on RASL, and an Indian cartoonist actually said, "Is that Tom Waits?" I was like, "Oh my God, it is."
And so RASL, RASL, stands for Romance at the Speed of Light. But why was that the title of the book?
I don't know the answer to that. Because that was the title.
Because it's not even quite clear what that means. I guess would have to think about it some more, I guess.
Well, Romance at the Speed of Light was just a way of saying a science fiction novel in one sense. And in the story, his relationship with his girlfriend, that's how she described their affair for the Romance at the Speed of Light. And why he hung on to that was just an interesting little tidbit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't think it has any deeper meaning than that was like his handle when he was on the run.
Mm-hmm.
His pseudonym.
In your art, you usually don't use motion lines. Or in rare cases, I found them. But like the fight scenes in RASL, for one thing, kind of looked like stills from a movie in a way. Is that like influence from having been an animator, that you're drawing things without motion lines?
No, I just think it's how I prefer to have a comic. Like for some reason, I don't like to use thought balloons. I would prefer that the character, either you see what he's thinking and you know it from the story, or he says it out loud. I don't know why I like that. For some reason, I don't like to see a person's thoughts. One reason is that if I can see Jimmy Olsen's thought balloon, how come I can't always? Well, I just selectively have a moment where I can read his thoughts. And motion lines, I like them. I mean, when Jack Kirby does them, I'm transported. But I just see movement in comics a little bit differently.
Okay.
I want the reader to put it in motion lines when he moves from one panel to the next. That I should be able to control the speed at which you switch panels and keep moving forward. And I sometimes I don't always pull it off perfectly, but most of the time I feel like there's a movement and the thing's alive. It's important to feel that the whole time, which can get tough. You play it and then you pencil it kind of quick, and then you tighten the pencils, and then you ink it. And by the time you've gone over the story so many times, it's kind of hard to still see that life, that movement. But I put time into that. I make sure I read it over and over again as I go through the process. Occasionally, what I thought was working, by the time I get to inking it, it's not going at the right speed. It's slowing down, and discovered over time that usually that's because I inked some detail that I hadn't put in the original scripts, right? So too many trees in the background, and your eye slows down to look at those trees. And I wanted you to not slow down. I want you to keep going. So I'll go back and take those trees out. That kind of thing is what I mean by. I want the speed to happen from your eye and your brain.
So, one other submitted question from James Sexton. Apropos of nothing, what's your favorite John Steinbeck book?
What is my favorite John Steinbeck book? I mean, there's East of Eden, there's Grapes of Wrath. I know I can't remember the name of the one I like.
Let's see. Didn't he wrote Of Mice and Men?
Oh, that is definitely one of my favorites, but that's still not the one. I'm gonna actually go online.
Yeah. Google his bibliography.
Yes. Well, let's go on while I'm turning my computer on.
Okay.
Let's just go with Mice and Men. Let's just go with Mice and Men.
Okay.
It is definitely a strong contender.
Sure. Yeah. Nobody's going to second guess that one.
Right.
So, are you doing many conventions these days?
Yes. Not like I did in the past. I used to go to every single comic book show that there was. Of course, now there's so many shows. It would almost be impossible to do that. I still think it's a very important thing. I still go to a number of different shows. In fact, I started up a show in Columbus called 13 Crossroads Columbus. We've had 2 years of the festival, working with the Dilley Ireland, Columbus Museum of Art, Thurber House, Art College, Columbus College of Art and Design. All the art institutions in the city are working together and bringing in cartoon guests. So we have like a 4-day event in the fall.
Yeah, that's the one Tom Spurgeon's working on too, right?
Yes. He is the executive director.
Okay. Describe your typical work routine.
Get up every morning around 5 o'clock. Do not check my emails until after lunch. And I just sit down. I just sit down and get to it. It's quiet. I'm usually done by 1 o'clock, and then I can go jump in the swimming pool. Cannonball time.
Yeah, well, you're in Florida, so it doesn't matter if it's the dead of winter. It's warm enough for that. So what's the best advice you've ever heard given to a new creator?
Well, I can tell you the best advice I ever got was from Bob Burden, the guy that created the Flaming Carrot. Do you remember that comic?
Yeah.
It was a very surreal comic, and Bob was a very surreal guy. And we were at the San Diego Comic-Con International, in the early 90s. It was a much smaller show. It was still a really huge show, but compared to today, it was a lot smaller. And they had like a little dance like that. We'd go, and the comic fans and the creators, were all there having a drink, and there was a dance. And they were moving, people kind of awkwardly moving around. And Bob Burden turned to me and gave me this advice: "Son, never let your fans see you dance."
Okay. Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Best advice I ever got. Yeah, I know that's not really what the question was for, but it's funny.
It's unusual creator advice, yeah.
I tell you, he was a surreal kind of fella. He still is.
So what kind of comic would you like to do that you haven't done yet?
I'm not sure. I tried, I did the Captain Marvel Shazam story. That was fun. Done children's book. It's not so much that I'm looking for a genre or a type of thing. It's just something will hit me, and this is what I feel like working on right now. So we'll see what it is.
Is there?
It's Tukey right now. I'm very interested in that. I'm interested in paleontology, and interested in the story of mankind. So I'm trying to find a story that fits it.
Is there a genre that you like to read but you can't picture yourself working on?
That's actually a really good question, but no, not really.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not. I don't mind reading, like Jack Kirby comics. I love that we're living in this golden age of reprints, because you can just read, shelves of great old comics. But superhero comics don't interest me hardly at all. I mean, it's fun when you read them. So there you go. I kind of like reading Batman and Spider-Man, but I never want to draw them.
Mm-hmm. So what's coming next from you?
It's going to be Tukey. I'm working on it. I've actually have pages on my desk right now, and I'm drawing new stuff for it.
Okay, cool. So, do you have a timetable for that? Any idea when something will come out?
No, I don't. Because I don't. I think this summer I might go more. But right now I'm actually just doing probably my favorite part of it, which is just imagining it and thinking up the story and that kind of stuff. So there's really no pressure on me to, I'm not at the beginning of my career where I'm like, I got to get out there. I got to have something coming out every month, or else people will forget about me. Now I don't care. I don't care. I'll just do it when I get done.
Bone and RASL are published by Cartoon Books. The color version of Bone is published by GRAPHIX. Jeff Smith's site is at boneville.com. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look up Deconstructing Comics on Patreon, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, Send it to us, and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The most recent episode is right behind this one in our podcast feed. This Thursday on To the Bat Polls, Lorenzo Semple's final Batman teleplay, The Joker's Last Laugh and The Joker's Epitaph. Does it stand up to Semple's other Bat scripts? Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. For the next 2 episodes of Deconstructing Comics, we'll be turning the mic over to Coom, who got a couple of interviews at Toronto Comic-Con in March. In 2 weeks, you'll hear Peter Bagg, and next week we'll present his talk with Gerhard, who did environments and backgrounds for Dave Sim's Cerebus comics. So, till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.